Hey there, welcome to the Eurostep, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and GSPN, presented by our pals at Prize Picks. I am Ty Windisch. This is a special bonus episode. I'm not joined by Rohan Kadi. I got someone else fresher than me, joined by Bucks Plus editor-in-chief Monis Khan, who, if you're not watching on YouTube, absolutely dripped out for this. I got my Bucks quarter zip on, which is funny. I feel like I can't wear this when I go to anything like Herd or Bucks games because it feels like stolen valor. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're going to be like, what, is this guy like the new intern? But I like to wear it when I do the show. But Monis, thanks for joining me. I'm excited. We're going to talk about Bucks versus the world. I'll ask you a bunch of questions about it. I can't wait to hear more. But thank you so much for your time and coming back on the show.
If anything is stolen valor, it's got to be the cheetah print hat. I did not, go against a cheetah to earn my stripes or spots in this case. No, man, you are. I am not at liberty to give out members of teams. Yeah. I will say this. Personally, I slip into, say, the royal we when it comes to the Bucks and the Packers. Yeah. I slip into the we. I do it in meetings. I feel like that is definitely stolen valor on my part. But you, sir, if I could gift anyone with the we, I would hope to be able to gift it to you and Rohan. You know, these diehards. I think you guys know how much I respect people who do what you do, who are so consistently engaged in the game and love the team. And so, my friend, not only can you wear a quarter zip, rock the we, rock the hour.
I'll think about it. I'm still a little uncomfortable with it, but I appreciate that very much. Maybe I'll wear it to one Herd game and just try it out, test run it, see how it is. But we're not here to talk about my fashion, thankfully. We are here to talk about Bucks versus the World, which is season 6 of Behind the Bucks, which is the narrative podcast series that you guys are doing on Bucks Plus Audio. So, people may be familiar. If you listen to our last episode with you, if you haven't, you should go check it out because it's relatively evergreen, but talked about kind of your mission there. The great Marcus Johnson podcast, The Here District, is I think probably the most prevalent at the moment, really, I think a go-to that really inspires a lot of conversations and, people are just tuned in because Marcus, Chris are legends and they have really important topical guests on. And obviously there's probably no other podcast that's like that locked into what's happening within the team in a sense where even people who watch every day aren't going to have the same insights, right, that Marcus Johnson does. But the Behind the Bucks, this is more kind of deep dive looks at things, some things that are more not more relevant, but more topical in terms of timing wise, right? Like the Damian Lillard series and just looking at this Bucks team. But this one was different. This is it was 87. Do I have my year right? I looked, I didn't write it down. 1987 McDonald's Classic, which we've known about for a while. And we kind of talked about at the very end without saying what it would be when we had you on last time. If you're unaware, first you should go type in Bucks versus the World and or Behind the Bucks. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, you'll find it. It's a 4-part series. It's great. But it's basically an exhibition mini tournament with the Milwaukee Bucks, who were not like reigning champions or anything. I'm going to ask you why it was Milwaukee later, which is pretty funny in there. The Tracer Milan, an Italian team, and then the Soviet Union national team, which was a huge deal because they had basically never played outside of the Soviet Union at this point, and they freaking came to Milwaukee and had this tournament. And it's a really cool piece of NBA basketball and frankly world history that not enough people know about. I think the extent of it is every so often like one of the score graphics will just trend on Twitter, NBA Twitter, because it's funny. It's like the classic old 80s Bucks logo versus literally the Soviet Union, which is great. But I want to ask, it's a cool thing. That is funny. It's all very weird in 80s, but why did you decide to get into this story now is my first question here. And feel free to share, your thoughts on it or what you love about it. But, how did this become the one where you decide or you and the team decide we got to dive deeper into this because it's really cool?
I think it's right up there with the Mecca Floor as obviously the Mecca Floor being an actual 30 for 30 short doc. Yeah. Where it's so bizarre. Yeah. And so just startling. You just can't help but wonder what is that? And what you're talking about is ABC broadcast the final match of this round robin tournament, Bucks versus the Soviet Union national team, 1987, during the last few years of the Cold War, at a time when the U.S. hadn't even gotten a chance to play the Soviet Union national team at the Olympic level in over a decade. So they boycott the 80 Olympics. Then the Soviet Union boycotts the 84 LA. The 80 Olympics are in Moscow. The Soviet Union boycott the 84 Olympics. So they haven't even been to the Olympics at the same time by the time 1987 rolls around. And the last time they played, which at the time was 15 years difference, but in 1972, the last time they played at the Olympics was like this extraordinarily controversial gold medal game that was just crazily bizarre ending that gifted the Soviet Union national team, in a sense, their gold medal. And so the stakes are just really high. America has been waiting for the U.S. to get revenge against the Soviet Union team, which fans in America feel like the gold medal was stolen from them. They haven't met at the Olympics because of these geopolitical situations in 15 years. And now, before the 88 Olympics in Seoul, the Soviet Union national team decides to play the first time against an NBA team. So there are a few layers here. Not only have they not played the U.S., they've never played an NBA team before. They do college circuits, playing Marquette, Indiana, UNC, Kansas, Kentucky over the summer. But they've never played against the Bucks. They've never played against the NBA. So it really was our goal and ambition with Behind the Bucks from the beginning, is to really create that cinematic 30 for 30 treatment for a long form podcast. And this story felt like our best opportunity to do it in the biggest way for something that really nobody knows enough about.
100% agree. And I think what's great about this particular story is it's very Bucks coded, from obviously the fact that they're in the game, right? So that's, clearly. But I think I love the way you opened it, which is like with Giannis, right? And the natural kind of progression that from this sort of game, and obviously the Olympics always existed, but, really just drawing together like more international basketball, but also increasing the competition level of international basketball, which was this was a big part of that as well, leading to now the league where it's like, 4-ish of the top 5 players are international players, right? And I think so it's relevant almost back then and even now in terms of basketball in the Bucks. But one thing I found really interesting about this was, it's a Bucks story, but kind of, I would say to a certain extent, Bucks versus the World is kind of like the Boris Stankovic story. And he's kind of the guy he's the, I believe, the chairman of the FIBA at this point. And he's really working his dream or goal here, I should say, is he wants NBA players in the Olympics, right? 'Cause for such a long time, it wasn't that. It was the college kids only that went. And we'll probably touch on the 88 Olympics you mentioned again, where, spoiler alert, that Soviets end up beating the U.S. college team. And then I think a lot of people then familiar with the 92 Dream Team as kind of a response. But I don't think many people are familiar. A lot of people know that part, right? Lost in 88. All right, let's send Michael and Magic and Larry. But it wasn't really that thing to this thing. It was this guy, Boris, who's like, we need to raise the level of this competition. He's the one who drew up this tournament and made it happen. So I want to ask first, how familiar were you with this character who, based on every interview, was the guy making this happen? So many longtime NBA people are in awe of him, basically. And, was it kind of a decision where you had to go through and kind of say we need to remember this is Behind the Bucks, but also we need to tell this guy's story. We have to find a way to do both because it's so important to everything that's happened since with international basketball.
I had no idea who Boris Stankovic was when I first started. I technically didn't even know anything about the 80s. I was born in 89 and everything before that. I didn't even know anything about the Cold War. Yeah. And so I think that when I first learned about Boris, it was through the passion of speaking with guys like Jack McCallum, who was a legendary Sports Illustrated writer, Kurt Gowdy Award winner at the Naismith Hall of Fame, wrote the book, The Dream Team. Yeah. And so literally wrote the book on this. And he's just I saw an interview. I just want to talk about this, how the reporting process unfolds and serendipity and the camaraderie and brotherhood of journalists. Sam Yip at Hoops Hype did an interview with Jack McCallum, a guy who I'd been trying to find on Google. How do I email him? What's his email address? sending blind emails to addresses that didn't work, rocket reach or whatever BS websites exist to like help us contact people.
Yeah.
But Sam Yip just did an article, and his DMs were open. So I hit up Sam Yip, and journalists like very rarely respond to my DMs, whatever. Very rarely would do something like this, but he was kind. I asked him, brother, you just interviewed Jack. I need to talk to him. He actually mentioned Boris in his interview.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, brother, you can tell Jack is still fired up on this story. Like, I'm trying to tell that story. Can I get an interview with Jack? Sam turns around, hits him up, is like, dude, Jack is open. I'll talk to Jack. And then he said, Jack is open to talk to you. Not only did I get on the horn with Jack, brother, Jack's texting like Brian Colangelo, like
oh, wow.
Jerry Colangelo, like
yeah.
Brian McIntyre, legendary NBA PR guy, Terry Lyons, eventually Russ Granick, who is the former deputy commissioner of the NBA. You know, David Stern isn't with us. All of his lieutenants, Rick Welts, Naismith Hall of Famer, like president of the Mavs right now, but was a huge part of growing the NBA under David Stern. All these guys come to the table because Jack is just plugging me up and the next guy is plugging me up. And I would just say, like, the reason they were so passionate about this story was because they wanted to do honor to Boris Stankovic's legacy. They love this guy so much and know just how, like, under-recognized he is. David Stern has gotten his due and earned so much of it. Like, this game and this tournament was also a David Stern, you know, part of his legacy, and he had an effort towards it. But Boris Stankovic was driving this train, and David and Russ were kind of just along for the journey trying to help him out. They knew it could help them, but they did not see the vision coming to life. This is the last thing I want to say on it. In this sense, this is the important point I want to underscore. We live in the world we live in today. We enjoy things, privileges that we have, things that we take for granted because of visionaries who everyone doubted before. Guys who were told this world that you live in could never happen. Boris Stankovic believed so deeply down that the best basketball players in the world could play together. He was the Secretary General of FIBA, and his own member nations were like, no, we will not let this happen. Like, professional European basketball players were called amateurs, even though they were making $500,000 a year playing for Real Madrid. The only league that were called professionals in the shamateur setup were NBA players.
Oh.
And that divide meant that NBA players, not only could they not play in the Olympics, it meant what you alluded to with Giannis earlier, why he's the focus of our preface to this story in the first episode, why he sets the stage, is because at the time, the great international players had to make an impossible choice.
Yeah.
Either you represent Team Spain, Germany, Greece. I'm talking Nick Gallis. I'm talking about Oscar Schmidt in Brazil. If you don't know him, Google him. These guys were balling supreme. Buckets. If they could have played in the NBA, like, we don't even know what the NBA record books would have been like.
Yeah.
Instead, they chose to represent their countries and make $500K rather than $1 million. They were willing to make that currency exchange for the opportunity to play for their country because they would have to make a choice otherwise. I just want to say that, like, the story as we understand it is that 92 was when NBA players could play in the Olympics. What I just feel like is so severely misunderstood is it also meant the opposite.
Yeah.
The great Olympic players could finally play in the NBA. And both of those things matter in history. Actually, I'm going to argue that the Dream Team, listen, it matters because it inspired people, and that means a lot. But the NBA we enjoy today is the beneficiary of the door opening for international players to play in the NBA without sacrificing the opportunity to play for their national teams. And as Giannis told me at the beginning of the season, as we say in the story, brother, if they had to make the impossible choice, a lot of them wouldn't have come to the NBA.
Yeah.
They would have taken half the salary to stay in Europe. Maybe not 1/20th of the salary. Okay, we're not giving up 50 mil.
Yeah.
But if you can make a good life for yourself in Europe, you're staying there to play for your national team. Boris Stankovic is the reason why they don't have to make that choice. He's the reason why these great players are in the NBA. And basically, maybe it was inevitable, but he started that clock in 1989 and the 92 Olympics rather than in 96. You know, we literally don't have the Dream Team unless the clock starts when it starts. The reason it started when it starts is because of the McDonald's opened in 1987. And if you don't believe me, listen.
Yeah.
And I think the case is pretty solid as to why that the McDonald's Open deserves its place in history.
Yeah, and I think one player who we maybe the guy we missed out on the most because of this, and that's a great clarification, who's almost like a specter over the last episode and to an extent, is Arvydas Sabonis, who you have some great clips of people being like he was better than Hakeem, right? Which is like, feels like sacrilege to say because Hakeem is obviously an undeniable great, but like people who saw Sabonis play were like, yeah, he's that good. Like he's so athletic. He's like 7'4" or whatever. Like he's obviously, everyone knows, no one's seen it unfortunately, but everyone knows, like, what do you say? Jokic is the best big man passer since Arvydas Sabonis. Like he just had it all. And he was one of those guys who came over to the NBA very late. I don't remember if maybe it was after like this rule, so he could have still played for his team. But I know he was also just kind of older, right? And we saw a more limited version, I think, with Portland. But that's a great example of like, you know, what if we didn't get Jokic until he was like 35? And then it's like so disappointing. Like we miss out on all this great hoop or Luka or Giannis, obviously the most relevant, but that's really how it was. And it's good that it happened as early as possible. Like we got a little bit of Arvydas Sabonis in the NBA. We got to watch him. So it is a really important, it's obviously a massively important thing to have happened. So I love that, you know, I think there would have easily been a way to do this for you. That's like, here's all this crazy Milwaukee Bucks stuff that happened here. Like you had enough, I think, for that full series, but I think you did it the right way. And like, we're going to tell the story of this guy, Boris, too, because he changed everything about basketball and not enough people know this. So I just think that's cool.
You know, and I really appreciate that. And I also thought, you know, I was listening to a lot of This American Life and I was reading a lot about like storytelling, and I was, you know, there are two things that I took away from Ira Glass and This American Life is that you need a central character that people can really want to see what happens to them. And then you need to be putting out questions that the listener just needs to have answered. And so those were like the two motivating things. And I think like my intention after the intro sequence of that first episode, when we meet Boris, my intention was like trying to make it as hooky and like really trying to get in his shoes. And I would say that he is definitely a protagonist. And I just hope as listeners move through our series, the moments that they get with Boris, I hope that it means something to them, because unfortunately he's not around to tell his own story, and the archival, you know, footage of him is not as readily available as I would like. So when we finally get to hear his voice and hear like what he has to say, like I hope that it just lands. And I think that's something that I was really trying to do from a storytelling and technical perspective, was like build up for that payoff. Yeah.
Yeah. His thing about like, you know, I think it could have felt bad to him. Like, I think basically he comes in like the US. Well, I don't want to give it away. He comes in like kind of during the game, the seminal game, the end. And, you know, the result is a little, maybe not the most dramatic the way the game is going. And he just has like this positive spin on it of like, it's going to get better. It's going to get closer. Like it's going to just go from here. And it's like, okay, you can see how this, like you can feel even in the limited like TV interview, I think it was, a radio interview, like the passion and just optimism that you need to like push something like this forward through a freaking international, you know, governance body like FIBA, which feels like all of the versions of these things everywhere are just like, it's impossible to make things happen quickly. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask about, I think the other person you could probably argue as a main character here, who is your narrator, Charlie Berens, who of course, you know, I think first came on the scene with the Manitowoc Minute, but now is just a stand-up comedian and just, you know, whatever, content creator, whatever you want to call him, extremely talented and funny dude in his own right. And I just want to ask, what was the process like working with him? Because a lot of it is more of just, okay, like, you know, if you've never heard this before, like this is what narrative podcasts sound like you can tell it's his voice, but then there are parts where like his comedy comes through more, right? So what was kind of the creative process like bringing him in and not having him just be, okay, here's a script, read off of it, but to really have that personality and him, I don't know if character is the right word, but clearly become like a important part of this series?
Yeah, I think it was definitely like the challenge of this series because it hits on so many different emotional beats, and so
Yeah.
much of it is exposition and so much of it is history. And honestly, like a lot of it is just like very sad. Like,
Yeah.
Boris Stankovic, like right in the first 4 minutes that you meet him, you find out that something absolutely horrifying happened to him
Yeah.
and his family, and that he needed to overcome that. And when you understand, like, that's where he came from, but for him to have this disposition and optimism, even though he experienced that, I mean, it's an important part of the story, but it's not necessarily what you think of, right?
Yeah.
When you think about Charlie Berens. So big picture, when I thought about Charlie, it's like he was just the first person that I thought of because he brings that folksiness,
Yeah.
just that automatic Wisconsin, that spirit, right? That
Yeah.
spirit of positivity and sort of like resilience and fun and just character. He brings it to our story. So I really like when I was thinking about this, I'm like, he would just be the dream. He was literally the only name that I ever had on my mind when I thought about how do we bring this to the audience in like the most big way, but also like make it so on the nose. And I think like the challenges is obviously like he was born 6 months before this happened,
Yeah.
like not necessarily on the top of anyone's mind, not necessarily like a personal story, also like with the different beats. But Charlie is like an incredible talent and he's had so much experience in life. He's narrated audiobooks before, and those oftentimes are not only punchline setup. So, and I think he's just like a big believer in the story that we were trying to tell. And so I tried to do a lot of legwork in terms of positioning him and creating like those moments where he could really breathe and be that voice. And he's just such a natural. And then the second thing is when we were actually shooting our trailers, which
Yeah.
I'm really proud of. We shot like 4, 5 cinematic style trailers to like promote this and be on video and bring him and the footage to life. And I thought that the script for those, like he brought them out in a way while we were shooting them that I just tried to translate into the script. And like some of the best moments that I found like we had shooting them, I wanted to write them into the script and try to make the process as turnkey and collaborative with him as possible. And so it was a dream working with him. He's the reason that this series is what it is. And I'm just so grateful to be able to have him be a part of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it turned out great. And then what are the other technical aspects before we get into like the 80s Bucks, which I'm excited to talk about too. But the music is something else that kind of struck me right away because, I think rightly it's very 80s coded kind of music, which I think is always kind of appealing when you hit that right sort of, and I wasn't around for the 80s at all, but it just feels 80s. You just know it does. And I think it's probably beneficial that this comes however many years after Stranger Things aired, because I feel like that was kind of put this stuff back on the map a little bit to an extent of like, hey, we're really hitting, like, I think we'd all probably seen movies that were set in the 80s. Like, I don't know if one comes to mind, but like, I think you had an idea of what the 80s vibe was, but I think Stranger Things kind of almost hits you over the head with it. And then this felt like, not like, I wasn't listening to it like, wow, this sounds like Stranger Things, but more of like, the 80s nostalgia of it was very recognizable. So I just wanted to ask about the process of like, what is it like for you when you pick out that and trying to make sure you have something that, is not going to be distracting, but is going to fit thematically and just, people are going to be able to make the same connection like I did.
Yeah, I think the music was so important for this series for us to nail that mood and that time. I mean, the 80s is so energetic. I mean, the music of the 80s that we associate with the 80s and the story are so similar.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is just trying to make the listener feel like they're back there, that they can feel it. And so, I know that like one of the questions that you sent me, I'm like alluding to it, but I really think these two things are the same thing. The only regret that I have, and I was actually like looking it up. That's why I was looking down. I was like trying to see if I could find the name of this band. The Milwaukee Bucks used to have like a house band.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And it was like a jazz rock band. And in the 80s, like they were literally like all over the games, just rocking out live before DJ Shauna.
Yeah.
These were the guys and girls. And their music was awesome. And I think like one of my colleagues like gave me one of their vinyls, and it was just super hilarious. Like I'm sorry that I can't even remember the name of the band. I can't even remember the name of the vinyl.
I'll have to put it in the description afterward. Yeah.
I would love to have shared, maybe, and I can find it and I'll send it to you, Ty. But
yeah,
like I really worked hard to try to like get licensing for their music. And if there's one thing that I regret like having not be, that is like the element. Like if I would have got their music into this, like it would have just made me feel like I really did that thing. I don't know if the listener would really understand like what they're missing, I guess that is to say. But just like in the spirit of what we were trying to accomplish, that would have really helped it be like super full circle. But yeah, the music, I had a lot of fun like listening to different songs and finding the moments. I think that's one of the most exciting parts. Frank Monroe is the audio engineer behind this entire series, and his artwork and his expertise is like the reason why this is what it is, along with Charlie. Like they're the real MVPs, these two, Frank and Charlie. And working with Frank, finding the moments, finding when do we want to start the sound to crawl in, build in, crescendo, end. Like those are the most fun parts about putting it together. And really what I was like looking for is that emotion. Like I just wanted to feel it, whether it's the excitement of the game, whether it's like the emotion of the loss, whether it's like the confusion and the question and the pressure that these teams were under being part of this tournament. Like I cannot undersell how much pressure the Bucks players and coaches felt going into these games. Literally, there was nothing like it ever before. So they literally could not lose. And there were moments throughout this tournament that they were wondering like, man, are we about to blow this? And it was suffocating. It was like so overwhelming, this pressure on their face. I really wanted the listener to be able to feel that. So music is just such an amazing part of storytelling, of long form, whether it's documentary or documentary podcast. And I appreciate you kind of getting a sense of that in what we were able to do. Absolutely. And then the great, kind of segue here for a team I often talk about, on our show and just like any national conversations, if ever comes up like, a forgotten great team or era. For me, it's always the 80s Bucks, and I'm biased, doing this, and I wasn't there to watch them. I'll hear some from like my dad who was and things like that, but kind of digging back in and like looking through like the old stories and listening to stuff like this series, which I think, we would have loved writing about when, my friends and I were blogging about the Bucks, like that, this appreciation for that era. And I think since I've started doing Bucks content, which it's been way too long now. We're over 10 years. I think we've finally caught up on the early 80s Bucks to an extent. And I think hopefully we get Marcus Johnson in the Hall of Fame this year in terms of a national sense, but that number of retirement and I think more honors for him is great. I think everyone, and maybe we're due for another round of like Sidney Moncrief stuff because he wasn't able to participate in this tournament. I think he had the number retired, but we could always use more Sid the Squid appreciation. But I think the early 80s Bucks now are a little more captured, but I think people miss sometimes that it kept going, when Del Harris took over and kind of some of the players rotated in and out. And I think right now I would probably say the most underappreciated Buck in franchise history is probably Terry Cummings, who's one of the few to be an all-NBA player while a Buck. And I think if you really just came into paying attention to the team, like in mostly the Giannis era, you may think like, what's the big deal? Like we've had all these future Hall of Famers and All-Stars and All-NBA. I think not as many. Actually, it might just be Giannis who made All-NBA. I'll have to look. I know Chris Middleton should have once and didn't because they didn't fix the scoring yet. And so Pascal Siakam got in over him, and that will stick in my craw forever because Chris deserved that. But, Chris, Drew, Damian Lillard, like it's like, oh, this is common. You look back at the guys who made All-NBA, and there's not a lot of names. Like, and it's really like 70s, 80s, and then really big gap, and then Giannis, and maybe Ray Allen once or twice as well. I think he did. But Terry Cummings is the one. Bogut. Oh, thank you. Bogut as well. Thank you very much. That one time.
I'll
cherish forever. That third team, I'll cherish forever.
Hey, it's
because that's all we had for 17 years.
Yeah.
That's all we had was no All-Star between Michael Redd in 2006 and Giannis like in 2016 or 17 or whenever.
Yeah.
No All-Star, no 20-point scorer,
Yep.
no All-NBA except for one lone bogus season 13 in which he didn't make an All-Star team. So what I'm saying is you and I grew up in a time where even scoring 20 points, being All-Star, being All-NBA, you could go a decade without one player doing any of those things. And this is a stat that I just really want to allow people to steep in, okay? Because we're feeling what it feels like this season and the last 2 seasons not to reach this bar. The Bucks, 20 seasons into their history as an NBA team, averaged, through 20 years, averaged 50 wins a season.
So yeah, it's probably around 50 or higher.
Through their first 20, they're like the amount of dubs the Bucks were putting on the board, that level, 50 wins is like an incredible milestone for any team, any season. And I know we take it for granted because Giannis for 6 years straight like had it at that level. But I think we've seen in the last few seasons, we haven't been able to get to 50.
Yeah.
And this year, you can't take it for granted. And through 20 years of history, they averaged 50 wins. And so that's the Bucks. And I think you're right to say, like, we really have some level of idea of the junior bridge with Here District like celebrates the Sidney Moncrief, Junior Bridgman, Brian Winters, Marcus Johnson, Bucks. But then they reloaded Bob Lanier, who is probably not celebrated enough, but has his jersey retired. But then they reloaded with Jack Sikma, Paul Pressey, Sidney Moncrief, and Terry Cummings. And the thing about Terry, retires as the number 50 scorer ever in NBA history. Won a championship, I think, with the Spurs. Maybe not. But was really part of those teams, was a key person on those David Robinson-led Spurs teams. This is the important thing. Not only an all-NBA player, but when you talk to the legends who played of his era, they refer to him as the best power forward in the NBA. All right. So if you have the designation of being the best power forward in the NBA in any given season, you, sir, are a legend. He did it in a Bucks jersey.
Yeah.
He is one of the dopest, just like, types of players. He was like super mild-mannered, but everyone, the stories that you hear on player pods these days when he comes up is he's just the strongest man, like an Adonis style dude. So just the juxtaposition between his personality and his reputation, and the fact that he's like one of the great singers and gospel singers, and like among NBA players in history, he did a national anthem before a game, and it's beautiful. He's just an amazing character, an amazing person, and I'm really happy that he gave the time for us to really honor him and his legacy as part of this story. Yeah,
I believe he had both All-NBAs with the Bucks. I think he was an All-Star twice and one second team, one third team All-NBA. Unfortunately for him, happened to wear 34 in Milwaukee. So that jersey will not, well, it will be retired, but it will not be his. But if there's ever a Ring of Honor or anything official like that, a shoe-in to be in there. When I did like 10 years ago, a list of like the 50 greatest Bucks of all time, which I will tell you in 2015, like a kind of depressing list. Like Mo Williams is on the list. Like there's a lot of guys who are like, wait, he was a Buck? And it's like, yeah, I think he's like, it's just 50 is a lot. And that was kind of, as you mentioned, the tail end of a pretty dry era of winning. But Terry Cummings was very high on that list. So I love the late 80s Bucks getting a lot of love here as the other protagonist, right? The Bucks fan, I guess, protagonist of this. And I mean, how cool was it for you to get to give those teams some love? And the coach, Del Harris, who one of the nuggets I had no idea about, I never thought about, was, this interrupted the training camp of his first season taking over for Don Nelson, which is like, had to be probably maybe a little frustrating for him in the moment. But I feel like back then, like they just rolled with the punches with everything. Like, yeah, sure, we'll play the Soviet Union. Like we'll cut short training camp, whatever, why not? But what was it like kind of digging back in? I know you have familiarity through, like you mentioned, Here District, but just getting to kind of learn so much more and talk to some of these guys from those teams.
I just think it's like the human element of not only the relationship between Don Nelson and Dale Harris, these guys are 2 Hall of Famers, but we got to understand, like, when Don Nelson, whose first head coaching job was for the Milwaukee Bucks, Don Nelson retired as the most winningest head coach in NBA history.
Yeah.
So this guy, like, put numbers on the board, was the great NBA coach of that era. Even though they weren't able to overcome that Eastern Conference championship bubble, he made it to the Eastern Conference Finals 3 times.
Yeah.
To give you some perspective, Giannis has only made it to the Eastern Conference Finals twice.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy thing to do. He did it in the era. Larry Bird and Julius Erving were the 2 guys who got him out of the playoffs, whether that was in the semifinals or the Eastern Conference Finals, every single year. One year he'd beat one of them and get out by the other one. Then he'd beat the other one and get out. So both those Celtics teams and the Sixers teams won championships in that era. The Lakers were waiting for them in the finals if they had been able to break through. So it's just to say that for Del Harris to have to follow in Don Nelson's footsteps and then be the first thing on his lap before the season even begins is like, do not humiliate us.
Yeah.
And when I say us, I mean the US of A.
Yeah.
Do not humiliate, and not only the NBA, not only Milwaukee Bucks franchise and Herb Cole, but the US of freaking A. Do not humiliate us. And following the footsteps of the winningest head coach like we could ever imagine. And not only a head coach, but like an icon. Don Nelson was like an icon.
Yeah.
He's like one of the few, like Pat Riley level aura.
Yeah.
He's like, he's an icon. So he's like selling tickets. You're not even just coming to see the great, incredible all-time teams that the Bucks had on the floor. You're like selling this. You're coming to see their swashbuckling head coach, you know, just on the baseline. And so anyways, it's just to say that being able to unpack their relationship, their love for another, their friendship, and that element of it, I just thought was so cute and like fun.
Yeah.
It just added that personal element to the story. Dell is like, he is a Hall of Famer. He's just a cool dude. He's a basketball encyclopedia in so many different ways. And he's like really getting up there. So just the fact that he gave me that time, I love what he brought to the series.
Yeah.
And the fact we were able to talk to Paul Presti, talk to Jack Sikma, talk to Del Harris, talk to Don Nelson, and the Italians, talk to their FIBA Hall of Fame head coach, who is an American guy from Chicago, Dan Peterson, who's just like incredible. Talk to D'Antoni, Mike D'Antoni. Talk to Bob McAdoo. Talk to their Hall of Fame, Naismith Hall of Fame, Dino Meneghin, their Naismith Hall of Fame, probably one of the great Europeans of all time. Dino Meneghin. Talk to Sarunas Marciulionis, Naismith Hall of Fame. Alexander Volkov on the USSR team. FIBA Hall of Fame, Tarakanov, FIBA Hall of Fame. You know, the fact that they all came out, all the NBA people who came out to tell the story. I mean, the more that I was doing it, I was like, how can I not get that guy? I got this guy. Like, if I don't get the Russians were the ones that were like at the end, right? Sarunas Marciulionis, I was like working for like 6 months.
Yeah. And
like by the time I got Volkov and Tarakanov and McAdoo, and I just got everyone. Then I got Don Nelson. I was like, dude, if I don't get Sarunas Marciulionis, like, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And so I was like holding out until the bitter end, and he came through, and we had a really, really awesome conversation. But just to paint a picture for our audience about just like the spectrum of perspectives that are crashing into this. And if you're wondering why it's 4+ hours long, is because, you know, just to tell the full breadth of it. And I just think it's like a roller coaster ride. I think it's a fun little thing, fun little ditty to work through. But anyways, I appreciate you, Ty, helping us unpack all its layers.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you guys putting this together. I want to ask, was there a moment, because you mentioned there's some very serious parts, but there's also some humor, right? It's got a spectrum of emotions. Is there a moment that you found the funniest? Because I have one I can share, but just like a detail or a moment where you're like, I had no idea, and that's actually like low-key hysterical.
I would say that, like, for me personally, learning about how difficult the lives of the Soviet Union players were was like super funny. Like, just like they were acting like it's not a big deal to come to Milwaukee and be able to buy Michael Jackson. And then they're like, yeah, I know, like, we technically, it was illegal to, like, or, like, we technically couldn't watch an NBA game. And it's not necessarily that it was illegal, but they didn't have access to it, that there was a reason they didn't have access to it, that they would have to smuggle in NBA tapes in order to watch the NBA. And I want to put this in perspective. They are dedicating their lives to basketball.
Yeah.
They're the best national team. Like, imagine dedicating your life to something and not being able to watch Magic Johnson do it. Yeah. Like, your life is basketball, but you can't watch Larry Bird. Or, like, you can only watch Larry Bird, like, once every 6 months when you smuggle in a tape across a border. Like, imagine, like, loving something so much, but not being able to just learn about it. And in such a exciting way. So it's like the great filmmakers of history, like not being able to watch Scorsese or something like that.
Yeah.
It's out there, but like, and you dedicate your life to it, you just can't do it. So just like that element of, there's Chernobyl, right? It happened in Volkov's backyard. I think there's another detail that didn't make it in the story. It was like how Chernobyl affected Alexander Volkov.
Oh, wow.
And we have this character in the story, Tim, who is like a American scout and coach in Europe. And he told me he was like with Alexander Volkov like when Chernobyl happened.
Oh my God.
And it like happened like near where Volkov was from in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And like how like he was like with Alexander Volkov. He's like, brother, just get away, go to the beach, like hang out, like just be with your thoughts. Like I got your back, and then just how emotional Alexander, like these guys were dealing with warfare.
Yeah.
They were dealing with their countries imagine your country getting occupied in its history. Maybe not like in this current moment, but like in its history. And then you playing for the occupying country.
Yeah.
Like there's levels to this. Imagine playing against countries that had occupied your country. When I say occupied, I mean drop shelling, mortars, like, apartment blocks, like memorials to the fallen soldiers. And now you're playing basketball again. There's beef, but there's smoke between the Pacers and the Bucks.
Yeah.
This is real smoke.
Yeah.
This is mortar smoke.
Yeah.
So Chernobyl's happening. You can't buy furniture for yourself. The Soviet Union needs to buy furniture for you. Like, that's different.
Yeah.
The world isn't like that anymore. That's just totally weird and different. And so, nuclear, like right now it's tragic with children. And I am so emotional. Like when the one time, my son's 4, so I never even thought about this.
Yeah.
But like I went to my son's elementary school and I couldn't get into the door between like the main atrium and the classroom. There's just like a hallway, but there's a door and it's locked.
Yeah.
And I was like trying to figure out like how to open it. And they're like, oh yeah, that's like in case there's I'm not trying to laugh about this.
Well, yeah.
In case there's a school shooter. And so, and then you just think about kids like having to run drills. My son, like he's 4 years old, like he's got a drill, like he doesn't know anything about that. Then you think why like that has to happen. That's very, very sad. In the 60s in America, they like literally had to do nuclear, these types of drills and the nuclear threat to America in the 60s was like imminent.
Right.
Like literally children are like, we could get nuked. The Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, like, brother, the Cuban Missile Crisis is having nukes in Cuba positioned to strike the United States. And the finger is on the freaking trigger, man. So what I'm saying is like this story that we're telling is what that feels like. What does it feel like to be a school child on the other end of a nuclear drill when the missiles are pointed at you from Cuba and you live in New Jersey? And we had a guy, the former director of, because that's why you're so upset and triggered at the idea that the Soviet Union is coming to America to play the Bucks. That's how deep it is. Anyways, that's just to say that these guys were on all sides of that dynamic. The Cold War was not as cold as we would like. It wasn't benign.
Right.
It's not just like the idea of the threat existed. No, like not only did the threat exist, it had been like post-threatening.
Yeah.
So it's just to say, I know we were talking about being funny.
Yeah.
I may have gotten a little off the
a different interpretation of funny. Yeah.
Spirit of the question, but that's just I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it stands out.
I'm curious, Ty. I appreciate you. I'm curious, like what moment you were thinking of.
Actually, there's two. So one was I think in the last episode, like they were recounting like the Soviet team coach has the guys like lay down and like basically do nap time after practice, and he's like whispering in them like, "You're amazing, like you're so good." And I was like, you know what? I would do anything. Like, let's get some content going this year. Let's try it with Doc and this Bucks team. Let's just see. Maybe we roll off a couple at the end here. Like, worth a shot. But I was just like, that's a wild thing. And it's like, especially because they also like, the practices were grueling, like their conditioning was great. It's the exact opposite of the kind of detail you expect to hear about a Soviet team coach, right? If you think of like Rocky IV, like they're running through Wisconsin, like wilderness, bare feet. And it's like, no, we have enough of that. We're going to do the opposite. So I thought that was one. And then the other was like, I think episode 1, there was this whole segment of like, why was it the Bucks? And you ask like all the key stakeholders and they're like, yeah, I don't remember, which is just great. And then they kind of come around to like, well, we knew Milwaukee would be locked into this during like the off season. Like it's not like LA, and like, sure, I guess that makes sense. I think they did eventually. Maybe they didn't. No, I think mostly Europe after this. But I thought that was just a funny detail too of like, it was this seminal, super important thing. And no one seems 100% sure of why it was the Milwaukee Bucks why it was here in Milwaukee. But I'm sure glad it was.
And, I think that the fact that they literally didn't know, but then they like could reason out all the same answer.
Yeah.
It just was inevitable. There were not 11 different teams. And who actually knew the answer to the question was Jim Paschke.
Of course.
And it's what started this whole thing. And in my reporting, like the reason why I was thrust down this rabbit hole was that Jim Paschke remembered from the time he had just started as a broadcaster for the Bucks that the NBA wanted to give it to Don Nelson because they knew Don Nelson would win. And they had the concerns about it getting lost in the sauce. Obviously, you want to put it in LA or Boston, right? They're the marquee franchises.
Yeah.
But FIBA just didn't want to just run off the board. Yeah. And they knew they could trust Don Nelson. So Don Nelson is like a very important variable in this. Like not just the Bucks and the Bucks team. But Don himself. Then he gets fired before the game even happens. The summer that they agree to do it, like they agreed to do it in January of '87. But by June, he's out. And then by August, the NBA is just sitting around like, brother, I got to deal with Dell. Like, not that Dell is a legend, but like it was unknown.
Yeah, at the time. Yeah.
You go from feeling very good about your decision to like being like, what's really going on? And like when I was in the Journal Sentinel archive talking to Don, talking to Dell, it just was borne out that like he was a very important variable in this. And that's one of the things that moved on the NBA on the come up to this and picked up the pressure. I mean, Don Nelson's so funny. He was like, I just thought it would be fun. I thought it would be cool. I wasn't really too worried about it. Like, Don Nelson's not the type of guy to really get like too stressed out. He's like, we'll do it. Lose, win. He just goes with the flow. But Dell was like, he was up at night, really where he's a much more exacting, cerebral type of coach. And so he was definitely up at night wondering, how am I going to make it out of this? But his deer did not let him down. Did not let the good old USA down. So
no, they didn't.
And then as far as a coach, he was just this like enormously Russian coach at the time, Alexander Gomelski. He was just such a legendary figure in basketball. Like he led them to the gold medal in 1988. So if you're getting it twisted, like if you want to understand why it's a big deal the Soviets come, they won the gold medal the next year. Yeah, they beat the American team in the bronze medal match, I think, and they beat I think Yugoslavia in the gold. Like, they're the best national team in the world. They proved it. They played the Bucks, and then they proved it. They actually beat the Hawks in an exhibition game.
The next year?
The following year. Yeah. The next summer leading up to the Olympics. So, and there's a lot of dynamics around the games in Russia for the Hawks. But, sorry, you took the L. The Soviet Union had it like that. Yeah. They, legitimately had it like that. So that's why the Bucks were worried about the game. Also, real detail, reason why the Bucks, the game played out the way it played out was because in Europe, they play 2 games a week.
Yeah.
In this game, they had about 36 hours between the games.
Right. And
so in the NBA, you know how to deal with that. The Bucks actually had a day off. So, that's a little through line as to why like the games may have gone the way that they go.
Was there a daylight savings thing too? Like that was actually the other crazy detail was I think you have in there that the Gormalov, the coach, like wakes them up at 2 a.m. to change the clocks, which is very much not how you should do that. But that probably contributed as well to it being a little tougher and maybe the Soviet team having a little tired legs out there.
Yeah, it's kind of like, there's like the rumor, didn't like Jordan call the, I don't know, like pull the fire alarm? This
all the
idea
old
that
stuff.
You go and you
ruin the sleep.
Get them, ruin the sleep in the middle of the night, but the coach did it to his own team.
That's like, wild.
Basically, the true story is that they didn't understand how daylight savings times work. So he woke them all up at 2 a.m. when the clocks get set back to set their clocks back rather than doing it the night before. Yeah. And the nap time positive encouragement is just
insane.
Crazy image.
Insane.
So you actually, in the game of the 1987 ABC broadcast that's on YouTube, you see them laying down, getting positive reinforcement. It was so stupid, hilarious. But this is the thing about like why they won in 1988. Like, Gomelski would really go up to these guys and be like, hey, man, because they're shook. They want to win the gold medal. America is like the specter, right?
Yeah.
We can't beat the Americans. We're not good enough to do it. Gomelski went up to these guys one by one. He did it every day. He went up to them one by one in Seoul. He pulled them aside. He's like, you are that dude.
Yeah.
You are that dude. You can beat the Americans. You can do it. And, you just love that human element of like gassing up your guys, believing in them. One quote that's really stuck with me that's really powerful, and Earl Watson, former Suns head coach, UCLA guard who played with Chris Johnson, shared this with us on the Here District podcast. And it's something that just really inspires me and I hold on to. John Wooden, not surprising coming from him. But Gomelski is like the John Wooden of Russia.
Yeah.
So John Wooden used to say, belief is greater than reality. In the locker room, if you have a guy who can get the other guys to believe they can do things they aren't supposed to do. Now, when we talk about LeBron in 2016, when we talk about Giannis, right, in 2021, what does that come down to? Think about the crunch moments in 2021. Think about the freaking Suns. Think about what we needed to do as right?
There we go.
Think about what I needed to do. Think about me who was on the court in 2021. No, that's stolen valor. Think about what Giannis and Drew and Chris had to do in 2021, that level of belief. Why did they have that? Because of Giannis, because of Drew, because of Chris. Those guys are legends. When the other teammates, they're down 4, 37 seconds left. You got to make a stop. These guys are buckets. Booker has been wet all night.
Yeah.
Now you're going to steal the ball from him. Steal it. Throw it. You believe. Belief is greater than reality. I talked to you about Boris Johnson. He believed. It changed reality. I really believe that. Sports, to me, the reason why I'm so bad, I know I shared that with you last time. Sports, to me, is like the ultimate illustration that belief is greater than reality. And if we were to apply it to different parts of our life, and we're going to maybe even talk about this later, but like, that's what changes reality. And that's why the Soviet Union isn't the way, regardless of, I don't want to even get into how we feel about Russia. I don't even know anything about Russia. I don't even know. But like, all I'm saying is, it's not what it used to be. And the world is not what it used to be. And that's because belief is greater than reality.
I love it. Another great segue. And this was the one more thing I wanted to ask you about. But real quick, again, everyone, I think you have to now go listen to Bucks versus the world, because it is great. And it flies by. I think you said like 4-ish hours, but it goes faster than that because it is so interesting. And so well done. But you are running for, and I'm going to pull up the full thing, the Ozaki County Board of Supervisors. You dropped a great video about this. This is now my first ever political interview. I think it's going to be one question. I wanted to ask why you thought this was important and worth doing, because I'm sure it takes a lot of time and energy and not a decision you came to lightly. And I believe, I'll let you speak on it. I think you're still doing, your Bucks plus EIC position as well. But why, I think a kind of elected official role that I think a lot of people's eyes glaze over when they go to vote for a president or a governor or a senator, but just the importance of roles like this in terms of their impact on local community and why you wanted to do it.
I think that, if we want to have sort of bold policies that help improve our lives, help kind of release the pressure that I would say my family, so many families, so many people with so many forces that are, some challenges that are on the horizon. I think if we want to build a case for bold policy, it starts with showing that local government can work. And defeating this association that people have with like investing in our community is actually a bad use of my capital. I have limited capital, and if I were to invest it in my community, that's not going to help me out. I'd rather spend it on Cheerios, so I don't have to get the knockoff Cheerios.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna treat myself to some on brand stuff, and not have to get the knockoff stuff. And I don't necessarily believe that these investments in one another, in our shared experiences and services and resources, I think like it starts right there at the county board. It also starts at the local, even town level, alderman, whatever, but as school boards, obviously. But I think county board is like a pretty sweet purview because you're between state and local, and you have some sorts of relationships with each. Your job on the county board in Ozaki County is to manage a $110 million budget. So
pretty good.
How much of that goes into fixing our roads, our county roads? How much of that goes into our emergency services, our sheriff, our mental health resources, special needs children resources, homeless shelter, old senior centers, and how much of it goes into our parks and our, lovely natural space. And so it's just to also underscore the nonpartisan nature of the county board. The fact that, in essence, it is attending a few meetings a month. And also the fact that, I'm obviously participating within this body in a personal capacity,
yep.
Completely independent of any sort of, I would say these views and my answer is not brought to you by Bucks Plus.
Yeah.
It's
sure.
brought to you by my personal capacity. But I think that, beyond partisanship, Good Karma Brands. I'm not even going to speak for them, but I'm just going to say that in general, there is a concern about community. And I think that's what animated my decision to run. And I really appreciate you allowing me to share that. And I'm running on a post so Ty doesn't get investigated by the FCC,
yeah.
that, he needs to give my opponent equal time. I'm running on a post, so it's like pretty low stakes, but I think this is what I would hope that people who want to follow me on my journey in running for the county board and hopefully being on the county board can begin to understand and like basically just feel really attuned to how local government affects their lives, how they have a voice within that, and how participating even through voting at that level can make a meaningful difference. And honestly, at the end of the day, not only will I serve the people, 3,500 people that are part of my constituency, but I really feel a responsibility to all people who might be listening in a sense of like, I want to be a great representative of what government can do. And if people ever feel like I'm falling short of that or have some feedback on what I can do better, I'm always open to more information. So thank you. If anyone is interested in following my campaign, I have some social media handles across platforms at Monis, Monis, FOR4WI, Wisconsin.
I love it. I think everyone out there should make sure that they are just aware of, the elections, policies, governing boards, whatever in their area and learn more. And I think it's, more people that are going out for these positions and campaigning and bringing the modern spin. Like I thought your video was well done and kind of fun, having fun. Like this is not historic. I thought that was like a very memorable way to launch this thing. But congratulations to you on this and all the best. Let's switch hats back one more time. I've always got to ask you this when we're doing outro here. Anything else that you can hint or tease or that we should look forward to from Bucks Plus? Of course, we've got the Bucks in 6, we've got the Here District, but anything else that we should be attuned to as the season comes to a close in the next 10 games here?
I would say I'm working on speaking of the eras that you and I discussed earlier in the podcast, the eras that we were a part of, locked in on, growing up, those memorable areas of Bucks history that we got to experience in real time. My next series, For Behind the Bucks, is trying to do that story to the best of my ability. A lot of amazing parallels between Bucks history of the present and the past with the opponents that we may or may not have come across on this journey. And so I'm really excited about that. And Here District, I just think for Bucks fans, at Bucks Plus Audio, across social media platforms, the Bucks YouTube page is where our content lives. Wherever you get your podcast, to listen and subscribe to Here District and Behind the Bucks, Bucks in 6. It's just a way to give you guys the content you deserve. I love Bucks fans. I love Bucks basketball. I love Bucks history. And I know that as fans, like, we appreciate all of that. And this is our biggest, most ambitious way to try to give you that. And so I think if you haven't already checked out Bucks vs. the World and already aren't following at Bucks Plus Audio across social, like, that's the best way to stay tapped in to all the great content that we're providing. Excited to have Thanasis in a great crossover pod this past week on Here District. It's on the Bucks YouTube channel, on social media. So I would definitely hope that Bucks fans can enjoy it. And hey, while I'm here, the Analysis Live, baby, Riverside Theater, Friday, March 27th. You might get this in the morning. You can go at night.
Yeah.
So if you don't got plans on Friday evening, Riverside Theater, you won't want to miss it. Ric Flair, Nature Boy. Woo! So
legendary.
Should be a great show.
100%. It always is when Thanasis is involved, and always is when Monis is involved. Thank you so much for taking the time once again to be on the show. Everyone listening, go check out everything that he talked about. Check out Bucks versus the World. And if this is your first time on this show, please subscribe wherever you're at. We'd love to have you for future episodes. Always fun to do something a little different, but we'll be back with our usual sicko. Here's what we saw in the fourth quarter of Bucks, whoever. I should know who they have up next. I actually don't know right now, but I will know by the next time we podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Pod Random, and we will talk to you next time.